Although propaganda has existed for a long time, it began to be studied systematically only in the 20th century. Today we understand well what propaganda is, how it is produced, how to recognize it, and how to resist it. Begin with falsehood. This is probably the first thing that comes to mind when the word propaganda is mentioned. However, equating falsehood with propaganda is incorrect. A lie is when you know that an object is white, but tell everyone that it is black. In propaganda, such messages do occur, so an element of falsehood is always present, but the phenomenon is more complex. Propaganda is distorted information, omissions, manipulations, inappropriate generalizations, facts that illustrate only one point of view and present it as the only one, rumors, amplification of some stories and complete ignoring of others, planted narratives, and so on. Its goal is to shape a specific public opinion. It is an instrument for managing the masses. Those who engage in propaganda understand well what they are doing and treat it as a job. For their work, they receive money, visibility, and influence. Propagandists have one central obligation, by any means to show and prove that a very specific pre-formulated point of view is correct, that things are exactly as presented, without qualifications or nuance. They often engage in laundering the unlaunderable and explaining the inexplicable. Crimes, strange statements, mistakes made by the regime, all of which must nonetheless be presented in a positive light. In other words, everything must be reframed so that crimes become not crimes but necessary measures to save the homeland, for example. Propaganda is built on several core principles. It is emotional by nature. It cannot be cold and always appeals to feelings, featuring violence, conflict, shouting, threats, danger, panic, demonstrative bravado, and extreme narratives described in detail. It is fundamentally subjective. By definition, it cannot be objective, because it is not concerned with the actual state of affairs and exists precisely to prevent it from being known. It is oriented toward the masses, not toward intellectuals, which means it must be maximally simple and accessible, often reduced to short, blunt phrases, caricatures, posters, or images with minimal or no text, what would now be called memes that immediately signal who is friend, who is enemy, and what is to be done. If a country is at war, additional principles come into play, such as the claim that we do not attack anyone, we only defend ourselves, or that all responsibility lies with the opponent, who allegedly said or did something wrong or failed to fulfill promises. Why does propaganda work? And why does it work so effectively? Because of human nature. All people are highly suggestible and sklonic conformismo. We are by default dependent on the opinion of the group we are in at any given moment. Family, friends, classmates, colleagues. If everyone in the group shares a certain view, resisting it is difficult. We are also highly dependent on authority figures, experts, people in expensive suits or white coats, teachers, and simply elders. The higher the perceived authority, the stronger the influence. This has been extensively studied and demonstrated in classic social psychology experiments with striking clarity. Propaganda can and should be resisted, but this is not easy. First, one must answer honestly the question, do I want to know what is actually happening? This is crucial, because most people are not interested. People seek comfort, material and psychological, and the most comfortable position is to adopt the views of one's immediate circle, or to align unconditionally with one's nation, state, or leaders. If this is the case, resistance to propaganda is not possible. One becomes its target audience. If this is not the case, the first step is to recognize that propaganda is everywhere. The struggle for minds is continuous. Everyone who speaks on socio-political topics in the media or online, everyone labeled as an expert, historian, political scientist, philosopher, or commentator, is not speaking in a vacuum. They belong to one side or another, and, consciously or not, adjust reality to fit a certain viewpoint. This should be kept in mind when consuming information. Finally, if the aim is to approach the truth while recognizing the surrounding presence of propaganda, the method is analysis, restraint, and questioning. Questions and informed skepticism are the primary tools. Information is abundant. Images, video, and audio can be fabricated. Details can be invented. Inconvenient witnesses disappear, convenient ones appear. Establishing the truth is often difficult, but it is frequently sufficient to determine what is not true. For example, One reads that an aircraft flew over a certain territory and was later shot down. Before concluding that everything is clear, one should pause, because nothing is clear yet. One can only acknowledge that the event occurred, then examine the statements of the parties involved. If one side first offers one explanation, then another, then a third, and these versions accumulate without clarifying one another, but instead contradict each other, it is reasonable to conclude that something is being concealed. Propaganda's subjectivity is also easy to detect in the overall tone of a source. If the news is always, or almost always, entirely positive, if one side is invariably right and the opposing side invariably wrong, this is most likely propaganda. The reverse is equally true. If everything is always portrayed as disastrous, with constant claims of collapse, this too is propaganda. In the first case, one may ask why such claimed success is not reflected in measurable indicators: healthcare, education, infrastructure, income, safety, state effectiveness. In the second case, one may ask how basic systems continue to function if everything is as catastrophic as described. In both cases, inconsistencies emerge.